All right. There have been a number of reports of patients who shed viral RNA for weeks, as determined by PCR. It doesn't seem to be infectious virus. And the real question is, are they a threat for transmission? And I'm wondering if you think we could use a cutoff of viral loads determined by PCR to say this patient is no longer infectious, can go home, can go to a nursing facility. Because right now the physicians are really having a hard time with that.
Right. Again, a good question. And what is now sort of evolving into a bit of a standard that if you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more, that the chances of it being replication competent are minuscule. So that if somebody, and we have patients, and it's very frustrating for the patients as well as for the physicians. Somebody comes in and they repeat their PCR and it's like 37 cycle threshold. But you almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. So I think if somebody does come in with 37, 38, even 36, you got to say, it's just dead nucleotides, period.
Yeah, because as you know, we can't easily culture infectious virus. You don't have a BSL-3 lab everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
So is the threshold cycle is reporting that a pretty standard practice in doing a diagnosis now rather than just positive or negative? Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, if when you go in, when I get my test, it's negative. When someone comes in and it's positive, they don't give them the threshold until you go back and ask for it.
Okay, but they've got it.
They've got it.
Okay.
They've got it.
The New York Times had this story in August 2020. Your coronavirus test is positive. Maybe it shouldn't be. The PCR test amplifies generic matter from the virus in cycles. The fewer cycles required, the greater the amount of virus or viral load in the sample. The greater the viral load, the more likely the patient is to be contagious. The number of amplification cycles needed to find the virus, called the cycle threshold, is never included in the results sent to doctors and coronavirus patients, although it could tell them how infectious the patients are. In 3 sets of testing data that included cycle threshold compiled by officials in Massachusetts, New York, and Nevada, up to 90% of people testing positive carried barely any virus, a review by the Times found. One solution would be to adjust the cycle threshold used now to decide that a patient is infected. Most tests set the limit at 40, a few at 37. This means that you are positive for the coronavirus if the test process requires up to 40 cycles or 37 to detect the virus. Tests with thresholds so high may detect not just live virus but also generic fragments, leftovers from infection that pose no particular risk, akin to finding a hair in a room long after a person has left. Any test with a threshold above 35 is too sensitive, agreed Juliet Morrison, a virologist at the University of California, Riverside. I'm shocked that people would think that 40 could represent a positive, she said. Several articles has criticized the way the test for coronavirus is being carried out. Even scientific papers discuss the issue. These articles give a good overview of how the tests work. It can be hard to find actual guidelines used in laboratories, but some are available online. Here is the NHS in the UK. As we can see in the document, the NHS run the thresholds even higher than the New York Times article criticized, at 45 cycles. According to the Swedish scientist, microbiologist Anna-Katrin Engvall, even Sweden runs the PCR test at 45 cycles. On December the 14th, the World Health Organization published a statement on their website. The design principle of RT-PCR means that for patients with high levels of circulating virus, relatively few cycles will be needed to detect virus, and so the CT value will be low. Conversely, when specimens return at high CT value, it means that many cycles were required to detect virus. In some circumstances, the distinction between background noise and actual presence of the target virus is difficult to ascertain. Kary Mullis invented the PCR test in the early 1980s. He got the Nobel Prize in 1993. He died in 2019. Here's what he says about the PCR test.
Misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there.
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. No, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. And it is. No, there's very little of what they call HIV, and what's been brought out here by Phil Pott and Isai already, the measurement for it is not exact at all. It's not as good as our measurement for things like apples. An apple is an apple. You know, you can get something that's kind of like, if you got enough things that look kind of like an apple and you stick them all together, you might think it's an apple. But and HIV is like that. Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything.